Actually, I don't really want to tell you more about Deborah, but I'm happy to tell you other things. First of all, it's a treat to be here, and I love this double hitter between, I don't know, the Academy, and thank you to those of you who were there last night and then came back for more. And these two spaces both like speak to, I don't know, just the elasticity of film and all the awesome places that are supporting it. And micro cinemas have been an important part of my life for a long time. So glad to see you guys here. I don't even know if you call this micro. It's kind of a macro version of micro. So anyway, it's good to be here and to be back and to see so many friends here. So it'll be 4 films, 3 that I've made and 1 that I haven't made. We're gonna start with Optimism, which was part of a kind of research. It was shot as sort of home movie footage while my partner Steve and I were working on some sculpture commissions in the Yukon. And then I was just telling Corina earlier about 5 years after I shot the material, just happened to listen to the soundtrack that starts the film, which is a conversation between the ex-mayor and the ex-CAO of Dawson City in the Yukon. And when I heard that conversation, which I found hilarious, I realized, oh, there's a film. So you'll see the result of that. But it was shot, and then we went later back, Steve and I, to make some sculptures there. The film called For the Time Being was a commission that there's a festival called Punta de Vista in Spain that had asked a number of filmmakers to write a film letter to a filmmaker of their choosing. So my film letter, or video letter in this case, was to the artist Nancy Holt, with whom I share many interests, and especially an interest in similar landscapes that she and her partner Robert Smithson, and in this case also their collaborator Michael Heitzer, shared an interest in these sites. So this is sort of a letter both to Nancy, but also to the sites that we both love. And then a film by Nancy Holt called Mono Lake, where you'll maybe see some of those resonances, and you'll see Michael Heitzer and Robert Smithson in that. And then we'll finish with the Illinois Parables, which is kind of featurette. Actually, I can call it a feature because it's 60 minutes instead of 50. That's from 2016. And yeah, it's better to talk about that one afterwards, perhaps, but
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll be in conversation afterwards. So
And we'll be in conversation afterwards. So if you want to hang out, it'll be a porous conversation where Corina and I will be talking, but also you guys are here and maybe you have questions, so it'll be open. But also no obligation. We realize people have lives and sometimes you just gotta go somewhere else. So I won't hold it against you if you run out of here. And thank you also just to Mark and Zena for taking care of the back end. Thank you. See you guys after.
Thank you for this formidable program. I was thinking, it is like a beautiful suite, and not to like pat all of us on the back, but I think that it really, the way that things are resonating sonically and visually and ideologically and thematically, it's all, wow, this is starting to work. Yeah, there's so much going on. So what I'm gonna do is, yes, say thank you again and can we give Deborah another round for
There's a few people in the house who were instrumental in making these films. I see Alan Glass over there who gave me the rec for the Lunenburg Travelers, but I'm like, I need a really good version of Sweet Hour of Prayer. Jacob Ross, who's mixed many of my films, is back there. Thank you. And Erin Davenport, who was Mrs. Charles Vinnie in this last film, the voice, and I'm sorry for forgetting Steve Badgett, the indomitable Steve Badgett, who's helped my life in general. So, thank you.
So I really do want to, I've had a bit to settle with my thoughts around these, but I'm also super interested in kind of more immediate responses from you all. So I think what I will do is ask my kind of like broad poetic questions.
Okay.
And then maybe we can get into specifics.
Yeah.
But okay, so I am going to avoid the long commentary.
I was going to say,
that I wrote
that's
down.
intense. Okay.
It is intense. I might have to just write about these things. Okay, I'm not gonna actually just, do you want to just read it?
No.
Okay, so I was listening to an older interview with you, and you mentioned the influence of like some things that were kind of surprising, but now that I've thought about it aren't, which is like Agnes Varda's Vagabond and Barbara Loden's Wanda. And these kind of classically feminist films where a figure is thrown out or thrown against or thrown into her scenery. And because we can't really help but frame all of these with Smithson and Holtz, it's very much like, sorry, but kind of a sight, non-sight situation, an internal reality and an external reality that has so much to do with those different social contexts. And I was wondering, well, it's kind of a two-part question, which is like, do you feel like now, of course, things have evolved in your filmmaking changes over the years, and you've been doing this for a long time, like, how does your work fit in this trajectory for you? I mean, I could theorize, but, so that's one way of thinking about it, but also, how does landscape in your films, show a kind of situation that might otherwise be populated by one of these kinds of wandering figures who has rejected what she's been not given, right? And you do use figures, but it's quite sparse, right? So
yeah. Oh, thank you. And I love the thrown out or thrown into reference you made with Varda and Loden and other makers. I mean, I'm definitely a fan of the figure made tiny in the landscape, and not just the landscape, literally like the thing that we touch and move through, but the site, the social conditions, the century we're in, the centuries before, like all the things that contextualize women and others who aren't women, but that being made small by, and at the same time being opened up by, and being made real by, because you're humbled by. I mean, all the ways that maybe I'm the wandering figure, I don't know, or the one that's adrift, or the one that's like, I don't know. I like being sort of crushed by nature or by situations and circumstances that are like totally out of my ability to control. Because in a lot of other, ways and places, can be a control freak. So it's nice to sort of have situations to put oneself in, and landscape maybe like foremost amongst them, that you get humbled by or sort of, shown your place by. So I don't know now if I'm answering your question or how to say that, but I feel like, the way that a filmmaker like Barbara Loden or Agnes Varda, I mean, I'm obviously not making a portrait and following a specific person, but for me, the atmospherics of those films and the way that they're like they're just so good at showing social milieu and letting their figures be mirrors to kind of point back at this construction that makes what being a woman is, and makes what being, a human is, and shows us. I think both of them are so good at showing us the ways we fail one another, but not in a super direct way. Like the way that they let their figures kind of move across the landscape, and then it sort of like opens up like this wake behind them, this wake of critique, but never like a harangue, I mean, so I respect that so much about both of their works.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I don't know if it operates in the same way, but except for that I hope that the way some of these films have the political in them isn't a harangue so much as just a way to let it slowly accrue or something. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
No, this makes sense because it's like what they are leaving in their wake. I mean, both of those films in particular are also about like making a condition for listening, and because they're both quite quiet, except when they're not. But I think they've kind of there's room now for us to look at what has been made of this kind of survival. And the world that you're working within, or all of these different kind of reflecting worlds, like it is quite that rebel, right? I love it. But also, I wanted to actually move that into sound because I'm sure you've been asked a million questions about sound in your life. But so I'm going to just ask one that's sort of in particular to me, which I kept noticing is that I feel like you're really interested in like the kapow moment, like the kind of like. There's like so many different versions of this in all of these films in particular, which is like there's like the cartoon kapow, which you can kind of hear in like a lot of like the orchestration that you borrow, like from Charlie Chaplin. Right. There's also like the kind of like lightning struck by God like organ moment in Illinois Parables.
It's an incredible organ piece.
Oh, okay, yeah, I know.
She's a badass.
Oh, she's a badass.
Yeah.
Okay.
Je de Monsieur, yeah.
Okay. And then the time being, there's more of a sci-fi noise. I think that's happening when the crater.
Yes.
It's
a big event when a comet hits the Earth.
Yeah.
It's like, if there's like a pow moment, that is it.
Yeah. But so I think okay. So this is where I'm trying not to read my really.
No, no one's ever called it the kapow moment.
Okay.
I'm forever gonna I see it right now.
Because don't you
like
see the cartoon
kapow
text?
like outline and everything.
Yeah, with the yeah.
No, guilty as charged.
Okay, cool. So what I'm trying to ask about actually is I think what are these allegorical? How are they allegorical? Because it feels like the paranormal is in there somewhere. And I'm sorry for saying that, but the reason I'm saying that is because I am also connecting this back to Nancy Holt, and I'm thinking about your use of maybe the constellations. So the constellations, right. She drilled 4 constellations into the sides of her concrete sun tunnels, which are installed in Utah. Mm-hmm. And you have them in for the time being. I think.
They kind of look
like
white buckshot or something. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't want to. I saw a UFO at the sun tunnels. It's a long story, but so I want you to talk about it.
Well, there's nothing like a pow moment like seeing a UFO at the sun tunnels. So, hello, first of all. Yeah. I mean, wow, I don't even know where to go with that.
Sound and the
outdoor. I do love a kind of hole punch moment when a sound can either because it's loud or because it suddenly stops or because it does the equivalent of, when you see the white buckshot, my graphic homage to Nancy's holes punched through the sun tunnels, which, Star of Holes, it's funny, I just realized that shows up in Last Things too, but I think sound can often be better than image, although not always, of sort of drilling vertically, making a kind of vertical punch through this thing we're watching, and maybe that's kapow moments, or maybe that's just a way to kind of my desire to every once in a while shake your shoulders, because there's not a lot of times my films can be pretty static. As operatic as some of the soundtrack moments are. Maybe there's not a lot. You know, in this last film, there's like barely anything moving except for the hot air balloon, I guess, being dragged at the very end before you float up in the air, and in the beginning, maybe there's a few other things that move, but for the most part, it's really, there's not a lot moving, and it's, maybe it's me getting self-conscious and every once in a while being like, we gotta wake everybody, we gotta wake everybody up and get them back paying attention again, so it's like, you know, I mean, not that I want to slap people, but like, I do love the moment, of the vacuum that happens after a sound drops out. And you've just been like bathed in this, like, you know, really, maybe it's a loud moment or maybe it's more of a dramatic moment, like something very dramatic has happened or something very heavy has happened, and how to drop out of that and make you like conscious of where you're sitting again and who your neighbor is and just this place we're in now, because that's what I love about cinema, you know, that dropping in and out. And I don't know if every kapow moment does that, but I do like the punctum, you know, like using sound both as ground and this thing that's kind of a wash in the background, but also as like a semicolon or a period or an exclamation point and like grammatical inflection points. I don't know, yeah, I could talk a lot about sound.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me, because I do keep framing this with Nancy and and so I think I was thinking about how he was so kind of invested in like demythifying art and saying like artifice is artifice, and you know, yes, let's recognize that this is a system, and like what are we doing in it, and so for you, I feel like your work is doing kind of like reality testing. It's like less like self-reflexive, like yes, we're watching something an artist made, but instead it is kind of like it kind of advances both of them. You know, if we were to say, I don't want to kind of put them on some kind of opposite end of each other, but I do feel like Holt is interested in kind of cosmic design, and Smithson is challenging that, right? The East Coast West Coast thing, maybe, but maybe, but I do feel like your work is kind of and of course it has to do with sound, but yeah, that moment I feel for me like lets in all of it somehow. I don't know.
Yeah, it's nice to have a big enough basket that you can just be like the person who's eating marshmallows and spreading them around and setting your map on fire and being, you know, running through the flies, and at the same time thinking very structurally or super conceptually or about very long time frames. I mean, I think that's one of the things I share in common, or what I admire about artists like Heitzer and Smithson and Holt, for whom landscape is this prism or way to look through and at not just ourselves, but I don't know, stuff in general. So I was going to add something else to it, but I forgot what.
Well, could you talk
then maybe a bit about your interest in sculpture and mirrors and this kind of insertion of that allows for this, you know, like the balancing of the sun and these kinds of things. And maybe for a second talk about the sculptures you were making in Optimism before the film came to.
Oh, sure. Yeah, sculpture is the way I think about cinema. I mean, it is because I'm not a sort of natively very narrative person, but I am someone who thinks temporally, and like Tchaikovsky said long ago, I mean, just it's like, oh, let's just sculpt these things in time. So let's think about volumes, and let's think about pressure, and let's think about building pressure and relieving pressure, and basically just building up mounds and pyramids and circles, and in a very simple way, the forms, when I edit, I think of them as volumes. And so the mirrors are a way to both have the sun in your pocket, I guess, or, you know, have it be really vernacular and everyday and also something profound. And the sculptures that Steve and I were working on in the Yukon were a commission as part of a, I forget the name actually of that. Steve, do you remember? I don't know if he's in here still. Maybe he can speak it out, but basically it was a series of sculptures that people were responding to the landscape in some way. And so just because the Yukon has such a heavy history of extraction and mania around gold, and then that got us thinking about just what is value, and what makes something valuable, and how the ways that desire is tied to place, and just sort of all these, we were just thinking around and in and through gold and extractive industries. And so the sculptures that we made were, one of them was the circle that you see in the film, which is a giant mirrored disc that was up on the hill that was meant to be able to look like a hole through the mountain, or an eye, or a white ping pong ball. There could be a lot of different things. And we had made that separately from not knowing the story of that they tell us at the beginning of the film about like how we had this idea to have a heliostat and to reflect a sunbeam. But then when I heard the recording years later, or remembered that I had made the recording years later, I'm like, oh, our sculpture illustrates their idea, even though it wasn't their idea. So we had made that disc, and we had made, we had in the bank of this town the live price of gold, because when we were there in I don't know, whatever year that was, maybe 14 or 15, the price of gold had skyrocketed, so there was all these new speculators coming, and it was a mini gold rush that had happened again. And then to see this live display of updated every 15 seconds of the price of gold and the disc across the river, which were attended by ravens. I don't know, it's a bit long to get into it. There were these scopes, and you would look through the scope to see these sculptures, to see the price of gold in the bank window, or to see the mirror across the window, just to sort of make this act of looking, to tie it into desire and to tie it into acts of extraction. And I mean, in a way, I'm going off script here, but I mean that how different is the extractive industry from filmmaking? I mean, I guess I was just thinking about desire and looking and gleaning from place, and who's complicit in this sort of, taking from, and how different or how close is our acts of extraction to acts of gleaning images. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's sort of related.
Yeah, I mean, it adds to my question.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I just made it more complicated.
No, I mean, because it kind of tracks back to thinking about how your political consciousness is shaped, and thinking about these things, shape-wise or something. At first I wanted to ask you, like how, it was like, which shapes come to you when, or something. It was like, but I think that it's kind of clear that
They're just always hanging out.
Yeah, because they're always hanging out. I think you said somewhere that like the triangle is the most stable shape.
Well, it is, it is. I mean, it's just call it what it is. Strong. 3 sides, like stable.
But anyway, so just thinking about extraction and triangles. But so maybe what I'll do, so that I don't ramble, is see if any of you have questions.
Yeah.
Pass along the mic.
People do.
They do, right?
Can you just, do we need to record them? Or can you just
maybe
say your question loud? I'll give it to you.
You don't have to say it.
I'll just stand really close to you to make you nervous.
Hello.
I can hand it back.
Okay.
Okay.
No, I meant it.
So, if wow, it's like,
He doesn't know.
huh.
People need minutes.
So I see like Okay, let me start over.
You got it.
So there's like an inherent like thing with like three, I guess there's like a relationship to like it being like, I don't know, you can't tip over a tripod easily but also like, I don't know, chairs have 5 legs and stuff, there's something like inherent, but I'm wondering like what your thoughts are on the sort of like things that don't really bear a sort of relationship to like a standard that's like visible. I guess my main question is like, why, like, would you have an explanation for like, or like, would you have an explanation for why like the utility frequency of the US of North America is 60 hertz and why it's, or
Would
the-
I have one?
Or, I mean, I guess I feel like that's like a common thread, it feels. I don't know. Sorry, not so much a question, but just like an observation of like,
Okay. So I think, I'm not sure, I totally don't understand your question, but what I do understand is that you're thinking about systems and stability, or you brought up triangles and you brought up the 60 hertz, which is what electricity, courses through in this country, maybe 50 hertz in a different country. And so like, why is it, why is that system part of what makes what we rely on to power our country, or why is part of what you're asking an interest in instability versus stability, or an interest in sort of how to subvert or how to ask a question of systems that are so pervasive that we don't see them? Because if you are, I am interested in systems that are so ubiquitous or so taken for granted that we stop questioning why they're there, and yet if something happens to them, all hell breaks loose. Like if there's like a power outage, then you lose not just the power in your house, but it's like a military emergency, and it's like a weak point, and things can really go haywire. And so I guess, yeah, I'm definitely interested in questioning these things that seem so big or so taken for granted, like rule sets that maybe we need them to live by, but like we should question them because they affect everything we do. And I don't know if that answered you well. And there was someone kind of, behind you. You want to hand that back to the person?
Thanks so much. A lot of your films are anchored to particular sites.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if you have anything general to say about what makes a site a particularly good subject for a film in particular. How do you choose your sites?
I guess I don't know when I choose them that they'd be a good subject for the film, but I guess I could specifically speak in the case of the last film. I was choosing the sites for initially places that I was thinking of as like a thin place, which is a Jesuit idea where the border between the lived, experienced world and the afterworld or the world of the dead or the spirit world is really thin. But I was thinking about like, well, what about a thin place between our lived world and in a more secular sense, and just some, in the case of this film, maybe heavy, pretty fucked up thing that happened in that place, and somehow it still feels really heavy to me. So I started pilgrimaging. That's how I chose the places of the Illinois parables, whereas in other films like Optimism or For the Time Being, those sites were chosen more because in the case of optimism, because we have the commission to make sculptures there, and then you're already there, and then you start, it's hard for me to resist researching a place once I'm there, like what has happened here, and what, in the case of Dawson, it's totally fascinating, this desire for this thing that's gold, and why does gold have value anyway, and totally changed the social dynamics of that place and pushed out people who had been there, and it transmorgified, is that even a word? It totally made the place something other and continues to become other, and then it was a case of the prompt chose me, but then we started researching the place, and then the case of, for the time being, Steve had been working on, is still working on this sort of floating platform, alternately called TLEP and GSLEP, or Great Salt Lake Expedition Platform and Terminal Lake Expedition Platform, that he made together with an artist named Chris Taylor. And you'd see it in one of the shots. It's like a pontoon research craft specifically for kind of hanging out on terminal lakes. And so in that case, it was like a part of a long-term project he's been working on, and that I've been interested in, because I'm into terminal lakes and landscapes. And so in that case, it was just like wanting to make projects that bring us to places that we want to hang out anyway, and then, getting wrapped up in the project, and then sort of shooting, I don't know, like home movie footage, basically, just kind of shooting stuff while you're there, helping out on a project or making a project, and then later it becomes something. So those are 3 examples, I guess, of why I might choose a site, but I don't necessarily ever know that they'll make like good cinema. I mean, sometimes to hear it on paper, you're like, that sounds really bad, or just really boring, or how do you make that compelling? And then there's the soundtrack, so that's what helps. So you spice it up. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
I can yell.
Yeah, great. That's great. We hear you.
So, as you know, we're from Illinois, and we used to go to the Argonne National Library.
Yeah, those buffalo.
Like, those places you're not allowed to be. So I'm curious, like, as you're working on that film, but any film, like, how do you think about the spaces you're encouraged to be in, and the ones you're not allowed to be in? Do you like find yourself trying to get access to areas and shoot from those places, or?
Yeah, I mean that's because some rules are just somewhat arbitrary. Or I feel like you should always look sort of like that rule of shoot first, ask later. Although I don't mean shoot a human with a gun. I mean don't do that. Always ask first and shoot below the knees, not above. So, that was I do, it's great to go undercover or to sort of be able to film somewhere, or not even necessarily to film somewhere, but just to be somewhere behind the scenes, or someplace that's sort of like declared by somebody a no-go zone, and why, and who set that rule. And I'm not just like, a transgressor that constantly like, it says don't trespass, so I'm gonna go there. But I think there are times when you do have a compelling reason to want to be in that place, and why is your reason better or worse than someone else's? So it's not the catalyst, it's not the main reason why I would go shoot something, but I would try not to let that, if I can get around it, try to find a soft way. Oftentimes if you just look like you work there, or like get a safety vest or a hard hat, or get something, I have done that. And I have, I don't anymore, but I used to carry, when I was working on a project in Wendover years ago at the border between Utah and Nevada, I would often have scanners with me, like police scanners, and if you have a scanner and you're on that channel and you show up where something has happened, people just assume you're part of the sort of control class, or even if you just have a hat on that says security or something that, you don't know. I mean, you judge a book by its cover, and if someone looks vaguely like they should be there, for the most part, you're like, I guess they should be there. But I'm also, at this point, a middle-aged white person and maybe less questioned than other people who don't look like me. So there's a lot of surface things, surface reasons we judge one another. And being women, also, people don't, if you're with a camera, they don't take you as seriously a lot of times, which is great. And I always use that to my advantage. 100%, yeah. Yeah, use what you can. So that's what I'm trying to say. Other folks? Oh, yeah, Rob Ray. Do you want to shout or do you want the mic?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you, Rob Ray. Thanks for being Rob Ray.
My question is I always feel like when I see your work, I have these moments where I'm like, I don't know what I'm experiencing. And then I do know what I'm experiencing. And I've tried that before and I'm not good at it. And so I wanted to ask you, like, do you test for that, or do you intuit it, or like how do you kind of weave or synthesize, or like hit those moments where you're like, I don't want to leave the viewer out in the cold, but I do want them to work for it a little bit or find a way through it and a way back on my way through it. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I do love to not over-orient, and that's because as a viewer and as a watcher of things and a listener to things, I want to be pre-oriented. I want to find my way through it. I want to grope my way through it. And it's okay for me if half of what, or more than half of what you're looking at, you might not know what it is, or you make your own definition for what it is. But on the other hand, if you're someone who does know that place, or does know that mineral, or does know that type of diatom, or that, plankton, or whatever, that you can be like, oh my God, it's a bullbox, and it's undergoing colony inversion. Holy shit. But if you don't know that, you're just like, it looks sort of like Robert Smith's hair. I don't know, it's something else. It just looks like something else, and that's okay. The success is if whether you know, whether it's Robert Smith's hair or the colony inversion, you still get seduced by it, and it still can operate as cinematic language, and it still stands on its own big tripod legs or something. It still has like a strength of expression that doesn't rely on not knowing in the like epistemological, like, data sense of check, I know what that is, that you know it through feeling something, that's as there's as much agency in that way of knowing, like the touching way of knowing, the groping way of knowing, the feeling way of knowing. All of those have so much authority, and we totally undervalue them because we're from the West and we're like, science has a special place, which I am completely a nerd and a science fanatic, and I love all that stuff, but it's always privileged against those other kinds of knowledge that like are really profound and moving and deep and like, I don't know. That's not to say like, it's gonna unlock the secret for you, Rob, about how to like orient or disorient people, but I do love being dropped into a film and not knowing where I am and having to kind of learn it. But the film sort of all films do. All films teach us how to watch them. And I love that, and then I like subverting it and being like, ha ha ha, you thought you know what you were looking at.
You mentioned that you sort of conceive of cinema in sculptural terms, which of course you get the Tarkovsky sculpting in time type thing, but there's also the strain of like avant-garde structuralist filmmakers taking the the film print or the projected image in sculptural terms. And I know you've worked in both film and various digital formats, and I'm wondering how your choice of materials, like of medium, how you view that in sculptural terms. Like, does that come into the film or digital realm?
Yeah. So I guess I'll answer that two ways. One is that like just in the most fundamental way, yes, the mediums themselves, like if I work in 16 millimeter, it's way slower. To touch a strip of thing that has time in it is really differently than to work on a computer and digitally and with something that you don't, well, you touch the keyboard, but you don't touch the thing itself. And so those vernaculars, those idioms of working make a different film. I mean, if I was tasked with making the same film in 16 or Super 8 or the HD, each of those would have a different result, not just because of the camera and the speed of shooting is so different when I shoot on 16 versus digital, but the editing is much more, I can be way more sketchy when I work digitally and work way faster, which is amazing, but also I would never be able to make a film like the Illinois Parables digitally, I think, because I actually cut that on 16 at the time and was running through everything, but even if I hadn't cut on 16, I wouldn't have shot it the way I did. So that's one answer. And then, oh man, I had the other answer in my head. Where did it go? It was about the sculptural thing. Crap, I lost it. I had a genius thing to follow it up with. Now I don't know what it was, but it was probably really good. It was probably like the best thing I was gonna say all night. You guys are like, I actually didn't remember it.
Does that have anything to do with linearity?
No, but I could speak about linearity. I mean, it's linearity in terms of story. I mean, as much as I love reading a story and imbibing a story and trying to relay a story, I'm not a good storyteller in the sense of, like, let's all sit around the fire, like, let me tell you the time that Aunt Margaret, blah, 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 blah. Like, I already lost the story, I don't even know. But I can think of it in terms of sight.
What about,
Sorry, you're like, I can get you there.
Am I interrupting?
What about?
Well, you're thinking also, like, maybe instead of linearity, you could have said like temporality. Like, I think that, you know, this, like returning to sites, or your interest in homage, and obviously Illinois Parable kind of like considering not just kind of history as it's been written, but how to not even uncover, but to work with these histories in different ways, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think it's as opposed to maybe Smithson thinking about sight in physical and spatial terms. I do think that you are looking at sight and trying to understand maybe it in terms of time in a different way. I don't know if that makes sense, but or I don't know if that's related to also to analog and to think about. But that's super interesting, though, how that would relate to the medium that you're using, I guess, too.
Yeah. I don't know if this is going to refer directly to you or to you, but I was just thinking of in terms of the sculptural, or the difference, not so much vis-a-vis the difference between digital and analog, but just thinking about forms as something that vibrates. Like, everything moves because it's got molecules in it, and part of our task as filmmakers is like, how do you make an entity that vibrates or kind of, you know, is charged, and you can do it with resonance, literally, like how something's, you know, sonically vibrating, or you could do it with a sort of melodical habit of pattern, you know, like a certain rhythm, a repetition of rhythm, or maybe the rhythm is the sculptural thing itself, you know? I mean, I'm thinking about the film I showed last night, but when I think about crystalline habits of how minerals form, habits, you know, the minerals grow in a certain way, that's also a form of resonance. It's also a form of, you could say, vibration. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is I think about pattern both as something moving forward in time, but also like vibrating at a specific point in time in more of a sculptural way. That's a pretty esoteric way to answer that, but it is, you know, relevant to me, maybe not anyone else. Yeah. I'm handing it back to you just because.
That's okay.
Other people might have.
Anyone over here, or are we?
Yeah.
I'll ask a question that'll make it all happy or leaving. Deborah, I would say that there's this, my take is you're always being, there's a palimpsest of mythocities or frame of reference, and everything is disjunctive. This is also the editing principle, where one story is just totally disjunct to the next story. I'm just pushing you out of the way, off the landscape, slaughtering you, or giving a new explanation to the landscape. And even the things, the sounds and the things like the kapow is like, you thought it was this, or, you know, here's this weird thing inserted in the landscape. Now, when you first came to Los Angeles, you were freaked out by going up and down hills, as I recall. And I was really struck by this, that you were freaked out by hills. Because, you know, I didn't know the Midwest was so flat. And then before that, you were making, like, there was a brilliant film called My Alchemy. And the editing, I would say, was more or less curvaceous. Things were merging. Things were not mutually disjunct, to the extent, anyway, that I think they are now. Then you made a film called Palimpsest, where it was a round form, and you were peeling off the things, but it was a round form, not flat, and then there was nothing left in the middle. And then everything became this, the current modus operandi, which I would say is the Illinois landscape again. You embraced the round when you were in Chicago, but then now that you've gone in the world, it seems like it's a return to the flat, like this principle of like this one, there's all these like flat documents, there's things that are like, this explanation is in your face, and then this next explanation is totally a different one in your face. So what do you think about the movement back and forth from just the landscape growing up in Chicago? And you know, you're just in holes and wells, you know. So this free association, I think it's yes or no.
We were just talking about the whole thing.
Yeah, oh my God. My brother also, my middle brother, Steve, when we first went to Pittsburgh to visit the town my mom was from, when we were kids, we'd never been around hills, and he just started crying. And he was like, this was according, I don't remember this, but according to my mom, he just was crying, and he was like, what are all these up places? So I feel like we both have this. We both had like a hard time. Yeah, we had this hard time because you're not used to seeing, you know, a space folded and suddenly like, oh my God, I can see that thing that's sort of far away, I can see it because it's lifted up on something. I'm just used to just imagining what's over there, but you can't see it. So suddenly like stuff that's distant becoming visible just freaked me out, I don't know. And obviously freaked out my brother too. But how, I mean, sight impacts all of us. Like you just take the space you grew up in and the, whether it's flat or hilly, but not just the topography, but, you know, the industry there and the economy there, the society there, like everything, you just soak it up. I soaked it up. And so I am a product of the Illinois landscape because that's mostly more or less where I'm from. And how maybe the horizon means something different to me, the sky means something different to me. You know, if you don't have hills to look at, it's like, you look at other stuff, you know, it becomes about what's above you, but why over the years the cinema has become more disjunctive?
It's more like an editing principle. I mean, it's not overtly like this, like Ross is saying, like you're in this one kind of explanation, but then obviously you're now in another kind of explanation.
I mean, the Illinois Parables, I think, maybe does that more than most of the other films I can think of. And that was in a way because that one was so specifically for me about, if we're gonna talk about history of the place, let's talk about all the ways that things have been represented and through which medium. Like, was it with a painting? Was it with a plaque? Was it with a newspaper headline? Was it with an enactment? And to push all those things really close to one another, these different modes of telling, to force you as the viewer to think about which ones speak to you or which ones you listen to, and then why, like why do I pay more attention to a mound? Why is the story that a mound leaves, whether it's an arsenal mound or, you know, like an early People's Cahokian mound or Michael Heiser's reenactment of an early People's mound, does that speak to me more, or does the newspaper headline, or like which mode of storytelling am I into, and do I listen to, and do I give more authority to? And I don't know whether that's how the audience ends up reading it, but that was definitely compelling, both the shooting and the editing, and putting all those modes of telling so close to one another.
That's the same thing with last night's movie too, for all the fun of you when they're but yeah, don't you think, like with all these scientific explanations and this mythos and that mythos, the science fiction version, this thing?
I guess for me, the last thing, sorry to refer to a film maybe many of you haven't seen, but there is a sort of science voice and then there's a fiction voice. But I didn't see it as tessellated. I think the Illinois Parables is super tessellated, but Last Things for me is less so. It's more like the science way of looking and the fictional way of looking.
We can argue outside.
Yeah. You can argue outside. Any other, I don't know. I also, maybe we really do have to leave.
Maybe
people, like workers have to
should wrap
go.
it up. I just wanted to say, I think it's interesting when movement is occurring in those moments, right? So that's like I think about like the Mono Lake and how it reminds me so much of being on road trips with someone and you're in, like I was in the Hoover Dam and like my partner's reading a Wikipedia article to me while we're driving about Hoover Dam, but then you kind of like forget all the things you're supposed to be learning as you go.
Yeah.
And then it being and then
like,
oh yeah, and then there's Hoover Dam, or you're experiencing each other or this
Right.
moment, and you recognize that, oh, I need to drop into experience now.
Right.
And I think that your films are playing with like the history of documentary in that way, and like, you know, educational filmmaking, and then actually just being. So
yeah, oh, that's good.
and so the movement, I think, like the driving is
driving, being able to.
traveling, and also
I mean, I guess if the film's working, the hope is that like the moments that you drop in and out are maybe different than the moments someone else drops in and out, to sort of do the living, do the learning, or do the just
Unknowing.
experiencing, the unknowing, the being lost, the drifting away, and that could be different for each viewer. And go see Hoover Dam, it's impressive.
But we have one more in.
So, yeah.
Extreme subtlety of the movement too, because you seem like you're sharing all shots like you're moving on top, you know.
Well, I didn't have a tripod. I mean, and some of them, not all of them.
Watching for this incredibly slow.
Yeah.
It's just highlights of why you should
I mean, which one? I don't know which shot you mean. I mean, I did have a tripod.
Is it like walking up the steps in Mono Lake, that one where it's a handheld?
And Optimism, definitely. I did not have a tripod in Optimism, the one in the Yukon, definitely. It was just like a little Super 8 camera, and I was always hand-holding it. Yeah, or just traveling lighter. I mean, something. Yeah. Yeah, it's always choreography, how you hold your camera. If you are going to hold your camera and
feel your body, you know, not just like to see it, it's an
yeah. Yeah, it's a treat to move through space. And I like, I mean, as soon as you hold the camera, you're always the alien. I mean, you're always the other, you're always the one who's intruding, and that choreography is not just like how I hold the camera, but also how it's just this negotiation, one negotiation after another. What's this exchange gonna be between me and this place that I'm extracting from, to go back to that? And it's different if you have a tripod and a bigger camera versus a small one or a more discreet one, or how much is it sort of folded into your body and versus sort of unwieldy and separate from your body, and all of those are different accents kind of, or different languages. They each produce a different film, so. All right,
Thank you, Deborah.
We probably need a break. So thanks for hanging out so long.